so that we didn't have to sleep on the ground. We slept on something else. Other than that, if in Okinawa, when I was there, we slept on cots, and they would just be on the ground, and then you would always stay off the ground because the cot would be. It would just be it would be like a folding cot, not beds that you could carry. It was one that you could fold up.
Yeah. So what was an average day like for you when you were stationed in...
Pardon?
What was an average day like for you?
Well, an average day, most of the time, you had a place to go. As a radio operator, you would go to a place probably and practice some of your activity. To be a radio operator, you had to know the Morse code, and to get good at it, you'd practice it.
Yeah.
And so we would go to a place. We had a place that we would go to, so that we couldn't stay in our room. We always had to go someplace to be in. And so when we were flying, like a mission or even submarine patrol, we'd be in the air about 8 to 10 hours. So you would spend all day flying. Well, when you came back, you landed, you were tired. And so you'd go to your tent and you'd probably lay down and rest. Wasn't a lot of recreational activity, was not much of that.
Yeah. What were the patrols like that you went on?
Pardon?
What were the patrols like?
I still don't get you.
What were the patrols like?
Submarine patrol was in the canal zone. It was from Guatemala City all the way to the Galapagos Islands, and it would be 8 to 10 hours in the air going down. Like I said, there would be 4 going down and 4 coming back. Okay. And we would be in the air for anywhere from 8 to 10 hours. So no matter where you landed, you generally went to your tent and was ready to rest. It was tiresome. You might think, well, you don't do anything flying. Well, you get tired anyhow.
Yeah.
And now I told you I have hard of hearing, which you're getting through now that you realize that. Well, that's from listening to these bombers for 8 hours a day. They're noisy. It's not like a commercial plane that you get in and that the noises. These bombers were just, you might say, just a shell. And then the engines on them, well, it was constant noise. And in those days, the government wasn't concerned about hearing. If they'd have been concerned about it, they'd have given you something to cover your ears with. But they didn't do that. I mean, when you fired your machine guns, you didn't have anything covering your ears, you'd listen to it.
And since the flights were so long, what would you do in the middle of them?
Pardon?
Since the flights were so long, what would you do during them?
Well, as a radio operator,
Yeah.
I had to listen.
Oh.
I had to keep log of what's going on.
Yeah.
And as an example, when I said we had to send back weather reports, well, that means it took time for me I had to send it on by Morse code. And it took time to do that, so I was always busy.
Yeah.
And other people on the crew, well, the engineer was busy. He always had his functions he had to do. And one of the things they carried extra gas tanks, you know, but when the one was running empty, they had to switch it over. So the engineer had things to look after. And as far as the waste gunners, well, I don't know what they did.
So, which part of the plane did you stay in?
Well, when I flew most of my missions, I was in the nose turret. I was sitting in the very front.
Uh-huh.
So when we went over the target, I could see everything in front of me.
Yeah. Oh. Did you enjoy the views of just?
Pardon?
Did you enjoy the views?
Yeah, it was. In fact, a lot of times when we were making a bombing run over China, it was a beautiful day, and I'd think, what a beautiful day to be carrying all this destruction and dropping. Because we know when you're dropping bombs,
Yeah.
it's causing a problem.
Yeah.
But we don't see any of that. All you do is you know that it's causing a problem. You're dropping bombs where you've been instructed to drop them.
Yeah.
But there's people down there.
Yeah. So you couldn't even see where the bombs landed?
No.
No. You were that high up?
You're up to be too high up. And when they drop, you're moving forward, the bomb is going down, and you're moving forward, so.
Yeah. So after Panama, you went to the Philippines, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was that like? What was different?
Pardon?
What was that like?
Well, when you got to the Philippines, Clark Field, they're very poor people. And they had been occupied by the Japanese for quite a few years, so they were, so in the mess hall, when you get food, and maybe you don't eat everything that you get.
Yeah.
And outside there would be a big barrel where you could throw your waste away.
Yeah.
Well, there would be Filipino kids there with little gallon buckets. They want your throwaway, and so you would give them what you would throw away, and they would take that home because it would be food for them.
Yeah.
So it was it was really kind of a strange situation for me.
Yeah.
You know, you're dealing with foreign people that have been suffering for a long time. So.
Yeah. Did you ever get to talk with any of the locals there?
Pardon?
Did you ever get to talk with any of the locals there?
But the locals?
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, one time I was invited to a Filipino dinner. Well, to begin with, I don't care much for fish. But when I got there, they had the fish was on a plate with the head and all, and you could see the eyeballs and everything.
Oh, yeah.
Well, anyhow, I wanted to be polite, so I ate what they had. They had some rice with it. Well, one of the customs of the Philippines, one of the customs is contrary to what I was accustomed to. When I was brought up as a kid, we were accustomed to eat everything on your plate.
Yeah.
Well, in the Philippines, if you ate everything off your plate, that meant you're still hungry. So they put more on there. Well, I didn't know that, and I'd eaten everything, and then they put more on there, and then, oh, wow. So then I couldn't eat it all.
Yeah.
So that was a custom that I wasn't familiar with, and of course we had, I told you we hired the Filipinos to build this framework out of bamboo that we put our tents on.
Mm-hmm.
We actually had good rapport with the natives.
Yeah.
It just wasn't that we spent a lot of time with them.
Yeah. Just hard to communicate.
Pardon?
Was it just hard to communicate? Was it hard to communicate because of the different languages?
Well, interestingly enough, a lot of these could speak a little English.
Oh, okay.
And I never learned to speak any Filipino.
So while you were in the Philippines, what did your crew do? Where did you fly?
Well, as I said, they didn't have much, but we would get one case of beer a month.
Mm-hmm.
And the government would see that, and that was not something that you buy. This is something that the government gives to you.
Oh.
And so you could have a little time. You could spend time, and you just spend time talking to one another.
Yeah.
There really wasn't a lot to do.
Yeah.
When you start asking questions, and I think, well, it was kind of boring in a way.
Yeah.
But you know, there was a war going on, and so what you were doing, what you had to do.
Yeah. At the time, how much did you know about what was going on?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I watch a lot of YouTube today,
Yeah.
and what I'm watching is a lot of different raids that they made with B-17s, and a lot of these raids they lost a lot of planes.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminds me of how fortunate I was that I didn't get sent to these places. So I'm quite often I'm thankful that I only learned that. But all I knew about was what I was involved in.
Yeah.
And when we would leave on a mission, and we'd fly over, and there would be anti-aircraft, little puffs of smoke. If you could see these puffs out there, you knew you were pretty safe, because they were anti-aircraft that were exploding in there. And if they would hit the plane and explodes, then quite often the plane would get shot down.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you come back after a mission, there's a great relief that you got back.
Mm-hmm.
And got back without getting shot up, when nothing happened.
Yeah.
So other than that, you didn't have anything else to do.
Yeah.
Other than go back to your tent and be thankful.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how else to say it. It's kind of hard to, when you start thinking back, you know, you realize you did a lot of these things because of the war, because it was necessary.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, we didn't spend a lot of time thinking about these things.
Yeah.
We were just doing what we needed to do.
Yeah. Were there any times where you felt like you were in a lot of danger?
Pardon?
Were there any close calls where you thought you were in a lot of danger?
I still don't get that.
Were there any close calls during a patrol or a mission?
Well, yeah, I had quite a few close calls. I can remember that when I was in Florida. This is after the World War, and I had re-enlisted. I was flying with B-29s, and they were training fighter pilots to fly B-29s. And when you're taking off an airplane, when you fly a lot, you realize how fast you had to be going before you start taking off. It become like sixth sense of that. Well, I watched one of these B-29s take off, and it took off too soon. Instead of building airspeed, when it take off too soon, it starts doing like this, mushing, and it got over the end of the woods, and it dropped into it, and it blew up. Well, that happened to us about a week later. The only thing is, we didn't crash. That was the only difference then. The crew chief of the plane watching us, he said, I thought sure you were gone. He said, you disappeared from sight. So it was a close call.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, these crashes, they were close calls. I mean, we had a full bomb load and full of gas. We had everything that would make a tremendous explosion if it blew up, but none of these things happened.
Yeah.
And I am like I said, I am as a believer in the Lord Jesus, believe that He took care of me. I believe that He answered my mother. I believe my mother must have been praying for me a lot.
Yeah.
In a sense, what I was doing, if you survived, was, I'm going to say, somewhat routine. The reason that I didn't want to get into the infantry, because I watched it on, and man, they're struggling through weather and I mean, what they have to do and go through, I think is much worse than what we had to go through. If we got shot down, everybody got killed, that would just be it. There wouldn't be no more. You wouldn't see anybody being hurt. They just didn't show up.
Yeah.
So in essence, it was different.
So after the Philippines, where did you go from there?
After what?
After the Philippines, where did you go?
That's when after the Philippines, that's when I was discharged out for a year, and then I re-enlisted, and I wanted to go into England, to Germany as an occupation.
Yeah. You mentioned that you were sent on a few bombing raids over.
Right.
You said that you were sent on a few bombing raids over China.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. What were those like?
Well, like I said, the one day that I recall the most, it was a beautiful day, and what we were carrying was napalm from. I don't know if you're familiar with napalm, but anyhow, I was thinking that a beautiful day like this, and here we are carrying a load of napalm we're going to drop on the city, because there wasn't much aircraft activity when we flew over China.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. I don't think the Japanese were expecting that we would be bombing them in China. That's all I can say.
Yeah. What were some of the other missions you went on?
Right?
What were some of the other missions you went on while you were there?
Other
missions you went on?
Well, most of them, that's mostly all it.
Yeah.
Other than submarine patrol, we didn't carry no bombs or anything.
Yeah.
We carried, when we were in submarine, we carried what's called depth charges.
Yeah.
In the event we needed them.
Mm-hmm.
But to the best of my knowledge, we never run across them when we needed them.
Yeah.
So, again, it sounds routine, was routine. in many respects.
Yeah.
And that's what you're beginning to understand, that not the same as Normandy, when all of these people hit the beaches, and there was a lot of killed. The infantry that they carried out, or the ground forces, was totally different from what we experienced. If a crew got shot down, you just didn't see them anymore.
Yeah.
You didn't see the results. You didn't see wounded people.
Yeah.
And I don't know how else to put it other than that.
Were you ever attacked by enemy planes, or
Pardon?
were you ever attacked by enemy planes or anti-aircraft guns?
No.
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 Was there
In Germany, if you follow it, Germany had superior air power. They controlled the airs to begin with. And the United States bombing their factories and all, it was a struggle to gain control of the air.
Yeah.
Well, carrying the same principle in the Philippines, they also had superior air power to begin with. But as war went on, and a lot of their aircraft carriers got sunk and things like that, and the United States had come up with more air power. They had literally, the United States had literally gained, you might say, air control over the air when I was flying missions over China and over. So it wasn't near as bad as it would have been earlier.
Yeah.
You might say that I went through World War II with comparatively no problems. Well, other than what I've shared with you, that's it. If you're sitting in the plane for a mission, if you come back, well then, what's the report? Nothing. When you might say, well, it was great, we made it.
Yeah.
I have a list of all my missions and the airplane number and the pilot, and I got a little book that I kept because I needed points. Well, when I was in the Philippines, we had been briefed on going to bomb Japan with B-29s. We were going to do that off the island of Okinawa. So I was in a plane or in the boat on the way to Okinawa, and that's what we were going to do. Well, I was in the harbor of Okinawa when they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. And then, of course, everything was in turmoil. They didn't know whether the war was ending, but it wasn't. Well, then they dropped another bomb on Nagasaki. Well, when they did that, that's when the Japanese decided to submit or surrender. And that was the end of the war. So consequently, I had been briefed on what it would be like bombing Japan with B-29s, and the thing that we'd had, their biggest thing we had to be concerned about was kamikaze pilots. They would fly their plane right into a B-29. They would figure that it's a fair trade-off, one plane and one pilot as against a big plane with 10 men on it. Well, I didn't have to experience that, and again, I was thankful for it.
Yeah. So, when was it that you were discharged and you came home?
Pardon?
When was it that you were discharged and you came home?
I was discharged in December of 45, and then I went back in, and then I was discharged again in 49, I think it was.
Yeah.
So I got 2 discharge papers.
Do you remember where you were when the war ended?
Pardon?
Do you remember where you were when the war ended?
When the war ended?
Yeah.
Well, when World War I ended with Germany,
Yeah.
I was in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Well, when it ended, then I told you I was on the boat in Okinawa Harbor when the war ended.
Yeah.
So,
And what was that like? How did people react?
pardon?
What was that like? How did people react?
What was it like?
Yeah.
Well, kind of hard to explain it. We're thankful. I would have to say being thankful. I was not looking forward to bombing Japan with B-29s and having kamikaze pilots to deal with. I wasn't looking forward to that.
Yeah.
So there was a big relief in me, and just that I don't have to do it anymore. War was over.
Yeah.
While it was going on, we never thought about when it's going to be done. We just didn't think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So when it ended, it was a big surprise to us, and as it was to the rest of the world. Dropping that atomic bomb, that was very secretive. Nobody knew anything about that except the ones that are involved with it. We didn't know that they were going to drop a bomb on Hiroshima. We didn't know about it until it happened.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we were as surprised as the rest of the country.
Yeah.
It was a great feeling.
Yeah. So, well, how were you taken back to the U.S.?
Pardon?
How were you taken back to America once the war?
How old was I when I got out?
Yeah.
Well, I was 23 when I got out the first time,
Yeah.
and I was about 28 when I got out the second time. I really had 6.5 years that I spent in the service all the time.
And that first time, what was it like to come home and meet your family and friends again?
Well, like I said, I was in the harbor of Okinawa.
Yeah.
Well, then when we got off the ship, we lived in tents.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my first experience with a typhoon was then. Again, the government didn't tell us the typhoon was coming. And so it started to rain, and so I and some other fellows went to the mess hall because they were regular buildings. They weren't more than, not tents, but a regular building.
Yeah.
So we went there and thought that the mess hall, that's a better place to be than in a tent. Well, so we went there. Well, then the next thing we knew, the roof flew off the mess hall, and then it was raining in there too. So then I decided, well, this ain't a very good place. So I went outside. I was going to try to find a safer place to be. Well, these sheets of tin were kind of flying around. It was kind of dangerous. So I got to a ditch, and I dropped into the ditch, and I stayed in that ditch all night long while the typhoon went on. So the typhoon lasted for all day and nighttime.
Yeah.
That was my first experience with a typhoon. But what I'm getting at here is they